In the forgotten outskirts of Millfield, where dreams go to die and gossip never sleeps, stood the charred remains of the Pinewood Motel. When Sarah Mitchell, 8 months pregnant and recently widowed, used her last savings to purchase the blackened shell, the town couldn't contain their ridicule. They called her foolish, desperate, even unfit to be a mother. But Sarah saw something in those ruins no one else could see. For 3 months she worked alone, her belly growing alongside her determination. The locals watched from a distance, shaking their heads. Then came the day she unveiled room 9, the only room that had remained mysteriously untouched by the devastating fire. What ancient secret had this room protected all these years? The silver wristwatch lay on Sarah's nightstand, its hands frozen. Michael had been wearing it when the scaffolding collapsed. Sarah's fingers traced the cracked glass as morning light spilled through thin curtains of her rented room. "We'll be okay," she whispered, hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby kicked in response, a small comfort in her emptiness. 6 months ago, Sarah had been the successful manager of a luxury hotel in Portland. Now, at 38, she was widowed, unemployed, and living off rapidly dwindling insurance money in a town she'd never planned to call home. Millfield had been a detour, a place to stay with Michael's distant cousin while they sorted out their next steps after the hotel chain downsized. Then the construction accident happened, and suddenly there were no next steps, just survival. Sarah eased herself up, wincing at the back pain her doctor warned would only worsen. The small efficiency apartment felt suffocating. Pictures remained unpacked, as if admitting permanence might make it real. Her phone buzzed with a message from her former assistant. "Everyone misses you. Position still open when you're ready." But returning meant admitting defeat, accepting charity from colleagues who pitied her. Sarah Mitchell had never been one for pity. She dressed carefully, selecting one of the few maternity outfits still professional enough for today's appointment at the bank. The loan officer had sounded skeptical over the phone, but Sarah had prepared meticulous. 15 years in hospitality management had taught her how to present an irrefutable case. Outside, Millfield's Main Street displayed the familiar mix of struggling businesses and vacant storefronts. The town had boomed in the 1950s when the interstate brought travelers through, but progress eventually rerouted that traffic miles away. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell," called Elmer from his hardware store. At 76, he was one of the few who didn't treat her like a charity case. "Big day with the bank." "Mr. Calloway finally agreed to see me," she replied, attempting a confident smile. "That old miser's turned down loans to folks whose families founded this town," Elmer warned. "Don't take it personal if," Sarah corrected, "don't take it personal if he turns me down." Elmer's sympathetic nod told her she wasn't fooling anyone. At Thompson Community Bank, Sarah waited while Calloway finished a phone call, his voice carrying through the thin office wall. "Another day, another desperate case," he muttered to someone. "Pregnant widow wants to invest in property. Recipe for disaster if you ask me." Sarah straightened her spine, cupping her belly protectively. She'd heard worse in boardrooms filled with men who assumed her success came from anything but competence. Calloway finally ushered her in, not bothering to stand. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've reviewed your proposal, but I'm afraid..." "Before you continue," Sarah interrupted, sliding a folder across his desk, "I've prepared additional projections based on comparable properties in similar markets." For 20 minutes, Sarah outlined her vision with precision that had once earned her Employee of the Year 3 years running. She highlighted her experience, market research, and modest initial investment needs. Calloway remained unmoved. "The Pinewood property is unsalvageable. Insurance declared it a total loss after the fire. Even if it wasn't, tourism here died decades ago, which means investment costs are low and potential for growth is high," Sarah countered. "Small towns across America are experiencing revitalization. Millfield has historical significance, natural beauty, and affordability. What it doesn't have is a future," Calloway said, closing her folder. And frankly, neither does your proposal. I suggest focusing on your child rather than pipe dreams." Outside, Sarah fought back tears that threatened her composure. She hadn't expected approval, not really, but the dismissal still stung. Her hand brushed against Michael's watch in her pocket. She'd started carrying it for strength. Standing at the intersection, Sarah faced a choice: left toward her apartment and another day of walls closing in, or right toward the edge of town where the Pinewood's charred skeleton stood as a monument to better days. She turned right. The April wind carried the lingering scent of ash as Sarah approached the property. Blackened timber reached skyward like accusatory fingers. Most of the roof had collapsed, leaving the motel's horseshoe structure partially exposed to the elements. A faded "for sale" sign leaned precariously in the overgrown gravel lot. Sarah had called the number impulsively after driving past last week, expecting an astronomical asking price, despite the condition. The figure the realtor quoted had been so low, it seemed like a mistake. "Land's worth something," the woman had explained, "but nobody wants the headache of demolition costs." Now, standing before the ruins, Sarah felt something stir within her besides her child. For the first time since the funeral, she felt purpose. Yellowed newspaper clippings fluttered in Sarah's hands as she sat in Millfield's modest library. The headlines told a different story than the ruins suggested. "Pinewood Motel expansion marks town's growth. 1962, Route G7 brings prosperity to Millfield. 1957, Pinewood celebrates 25th anniversary." Between brittle pages, black and white photographs showed smiling families beside classic cars, a pristine swimming pool, and a neon sign that once proclaimed air conditioning as if it were a miracle of science. Finding anything interesting, the librarian, a silver-haired woman named Ruth, placed a cup of tea beside Sarah. "The Pinewood was quite something in its day," Sarah replied. "Oh, it was the jewel of the county," Ruth lowered her voice conspiratorially. "My Harold proposed to me by that very pool. Summer of '60. Sarah smiled, turning to a photo showing a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Is that the original owner?" "Thomas Blackwood," Ruth nodded. "Built it with his own hands after the war. Had quite the vision for Millfield." "What happened to him?" Ruth's expression clouded. "After the interstate bypass was built, things got difficult. Thomas held on longer than most, but eventually," she shrugged, "the motel changed hands several times after that." "And the fire?" Ruth busied herself reorganizing nearby books. "That was about 2 years ago. Terrible business. You should talk to Chief Dawson if you're curious about that." Outside the library, Sarah found herself walking toward the town hall rather than back to her apartment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as she approached the imposing brick building. Mayor Gerald Hawkins was leaving as she arrived, his substantial frame filling the doorway. Recognition flickered across his face. "Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it? Heard you were asking about the Pinewood." "News travels fast," Sarah observed. "Small towns." He smiled without warmth. "Calloway mentioned your interest in the property." "Just doing my research," Sarah replied. "The building has quite a history." "History doesn't pay bills," Hawkins said. "That land deserves better than a memorial to the past. We've had developers interested in that location for years. Then why hasn't it sold?" Something hardened in the mayor's eyes. "Red tape, environmental assessments, bureaucracy moves slowly. Yet the realtor quoted me a surprisingly low price." "Martha doesn't always understand the bigger picture," he replied. "Look, Miss Mitchell, you seem like a sensible woman. That property is nothing but trouble. Dangerous structure, contaminated materials, legal complications. Focus on your baby. Find somewhere to put down real roots." "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said, not meaning it. As Hawkins walked away, she noticed a flyer taped to the community board. "Town Council meeting. Discussion of Millfield revitalization plan. All welcome." The date was 2 weeks away. At Elmer's Hardware the next morning, Sarah examined samples of drywall. The store smelled of sawdust, and the peculiar metallic scent of tools. Thinking of renovating that apartment? Elmer asked, appearing from behind a display of paint cans. Something bigger, Sarah admitted. I'm considering the Pinewood. Elmer's bushy eyebrows shot up. Ambitious. Most folks think that place should be bulldozed. What do you think? He considered this while measuring out nails for another customer. I think this town could use more ambition and fewer opinions. After the other customer left, Elmer lowered his voice. I worked maintenance there for almost 30 years, until Thomas sold it. Those rooms were built solid. Old-school craftsmanship. Fire damage looks worse than it probably is. The mayor seems to think it's a lost cause. Hawkins has been trying to get his hands on that property since before the fire. Elmer snorted. Keeps talking about some resort development bringing jobs. Meanwhile, half the stores on Main Street are empty. Sarah's interest peaked. Why would developers want that specific location? Location's good. Natural spring nearby. But mostly I think Hawkins has investors he's promised to, and they're getting impatient. He handed her a business card. My nephew does structural assessments. Honest kid. Won't sugarcoat but won't exaggerate the problems either. That evening Sarah stood again at the edge of the Pinewood property as sunset painted the ruins in shades of amber. With Elmer's nephew's preliminary report in hand, she felt a strange vindication. The main office structure and about half the rooms had serious damage, but the bones foundation, much of the framing plumbing lines remained salvageable. As she walked the perimeter, something caught her eye, a glint of metal in the fading light. Near what had once been the rear office, a small metal box lay partially exposed where rain had washed away soil. Inside she found more newspaper clippings, older and more fragile than those in the library. One headline from 1952 stood out: Mysterious recovery at local motel baffles doctors. The wind picked up, carrying away the moment of triumph. Sarah looked up to see a police cruiser pulling into the lot, its headlights illuminating her like an intruder. The property deed felt unexpectedly heavy in Sarah's hands, its yellowed pages crackling as she carefully unfolded it on her small kitchen table. Martha Reeves, the real estate agent, watched with thinly veiled discomfort. I still can't believe you're going through with this, Martha said, tapping crimson fingernails against her coffee mug. Most properties I sell, I'm happy for the new owners. This one, she trailed off with a shudder. Sarah studied the document's elegant script, noting the succession of owners meticulously recorded in the margins. Thomas Blackwood's name headed the list, followed by 5 others, ending with James Harrington, 29. Sarah asked, noticing Martha's flinch at the name. Left town after the fire, Martha replied too quickly. No forwarding address. Sarah's finger traced an unusual notation beside Harrington's name. A small symbol that resembled a key crossed with what might have been a knife. Similar marks appeared next to 2 previous owners. What do these markings mean? Martha leaned forward, frowning. Just old record-keeping habits. Nothing important. 3 owners have them, always with room 9 mentioned in the margin notes. Martha stood abruptly. I need to get going. Congratulations on your purchase, though God knows why you'd want it. She hesitated at the door. A word of advice. Some rooms are better left closed. After Martha left, Sarah studied the deed further. Someone had penciled a note at the bottom. Custodes secreti cave, cubiculum. Her Latin was rusty from college, but she recognized enough. Guardians of the secret, and something about room 9 that night. Sleep eluded Sarah. Her apartment felt stifling, the baby restless within her. When she finally drifted off near dawn, her dreams were vivid and disorienting. She stood before the Pinewood Motel, but not the burned shell she'd purchased. This building gleamed white in sunshine, its neon sign humming cheerfully. A man she somehow knew was Thomas Blackwood beckoned her toward room 9. As she approached, the door began to glow with an inner light. Before she could touch the handle, she awoke gasping. The clock read 5:17 a.m. Despite the early hour, Sarah felt compelled to drive to the motel. Dawn painted the sky in watercolors as she pulled into the gravel lot. In morning light, the damage looked less dramatic, almost deliberate in its pattern. The fire had gutted the central office and left wing, yet somehow spared most of the right wing where room 9 was located. Couldn't sleep either. Sarah startled at the voice. A lanky man in his 60s leaned against a pickup truck. She hadn't noticed. Coffee thermos in hand. "Chief Dawson," he introduced himself. "Figured I'd find you here sooner or later." "Am I trespassing on my own property?" Sarah asked. "Not technically, though I'd advise against going inside until you've had structural engineers take a look." He offered her coffee, which she declined. "I was on duty the night this place burned." "What happened?" Dawson's weathered face remained impassive. "Official report says electrical fire started in the office. Old wiring, faulty circuit breaker. And unofficially? Unofficially?" He took a slow sip of coffee. "Fire behaved strangely. Moved against the wind. Jumped gaps it shouldn't have. Avoided areas it should have consumed first. Like room 9, Sarah said. Watching his reaction, something flickered in his eyes. "You've been talking to people?" "Not enough, apparently. Everyone seems reluctant to discuss this place." Dawson sighed. "Small towns run on secrets, Mrs. Mitchell. Some benign, some not so much. The Pinewood has collected its share over the years. Is that why Mayor Hikings seems so interested in my purchase? Gerald's got plans for this town that don't include haunted motels." "Haunted?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "I didn't take you for superstitious, Chief." "I'm not," he replied firmly, "but I've been a cop long enough to know when something doesn't add up." The fire inspector found no accelerants, yet the burn patterns suggest deliberate pathways. "We never found Harrington," the owner. "And then there's room 9. What about it?" "It's the only room we couldn't open after the fire. Lock melted shut somehow, but the door itself barely scorched." He checked his watch. "I've got to get back. Just wanted to introduce myself, let you know I'll be keeping an eye on things." As Dawson drove away, Sarah approached room 9. Unlike the other doors, charred or hanging from broken hinges, this one stood solid, its green paint faded but intact. The brass number 9 gleamed as if recently polished. When she placed her palm against the wood, a curious warmth spread up her arm. The baby, usually active in the mornings, went perfectly still. Then, from inside the room came the unmistakable sound of a key turning in a lock. Sarah's boots crunched through debris as she carefully navigated what had once been the motel's main office. Sunlight streamed through the partially collapsed roof, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. After a week of ownership, she'd finally gathered enough supplies and courage to begin the massive cleanup effort. "You shouldn't be doing this in your condition," Elmer had warned when she purchased work gloves and masks from his store. Yet here she was, stubbornly filling her third heavy-duty trash bag of the day. Each cleared section revealed more of the motel's bones: solid foundation, salvageable wiring conduits, sturdy support beams that had somehow survived the blaze. As she worked, cars occasionally slowed on the highway, drivers gawking at the pregnant woman laboring alone among the ruins. Some honked derisively. One elderly couple actually stopped to take photos, as if documenting a curiosity for later ridicule. By mid-afternoon, Sarah had cleared enough space to distinguish what had been the reception counter. Behind it, a partially melted key rack still clung to the wall. Most hooks stood empty, their keys likely melted or lost in the debris, but one lone key remained, its tag too charred to read. Sarah pocketed it, feeling an inexplicable certainty it would be important. A movement outside caught her attention. 3 teenage boys had wandered onto the property, kicking at debris and laughing. When they noticed her watching, the tallest boy smirked. "Hey lady, you know this place is, like, super haunted, right?" "Is that so?" Sarah replied calmly, pulling off her work gloves. "Joey Markham saw a ghost here after the fire," offered the second boy, skinnier with a shock of red hair. "Said it was all burned up but still walking around." "Very creative," Sarah said. "I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave. This is private property now." The tall boy snorted. "Yeah, we heard some crazy lady bought it. Guess that's you, huh? Dude, she's pregnant. The third boy muttered uncomfortably. So? The leader stepped closer. Doesn't make her less crazy. My dad says only a complete idiot would waste money on this death trap. Sarah straightened, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. Your father sounds charming. Now leave, or I call Chief Dawson. Something in her tone must have registered, because the boys backed away, though not before the leader kicked over her carefully stacked pile of salvageable fixtures. After they disappeared down the road, Sarah sank onto an overturned bucket, suddenly exhausted. The baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting the confrontation. Sorry, little one, she murmured. Looks like we've got our work cut out for us. As she prepared to resume cleaning, something caught her eye. A small, singed teddy bear half buried beneath where the boys had scattered debris. It seemed strangely preserved compared to the surrounding destruction, its brown fur only slightly darkened along one side. Sarah picked it up gingerly. One glass eye reflected the afternoon sun, the other missing entirely, giving the toy a perpetually winking expression. A faded tag on its foot read Tommy, in careful stitching. The bear seemed out of place in the ruins of a roadside motel. Family accommodations weren't uncommon, but the Pinewood had primarily catered to travelers passing through, not vacationing families with children. Sarah tucked the bear into her bag. As she did, a police cruiser pulled into the lot. Chief Dawson emerged, surveying her progress with raised eyebrows. Impressive, he admitted. Though my deputy's wife would have my badge if I didn't remind you that heavy labor and third trimesters don't usually mix well. I'm being careful, Sarah assured him. Just sorting at this stage, nothing structural. Dawson nodded, unconvinced. Saw the Mercer boy and his friends leaving. They giving you trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle. Still, I'll have a word with their parents. He gestured toward room 9. Any luck with that door? I haven't tried again, Sarah admitted. Been focusing on areas I know I can make progress with. Dawson's gaze lingered on the room. Smart, though I admit I'm curious what's inside that survived the fire. You never forced entry during the investigation. Try. Chainsaw barely scratched the wood. Fire department's hydraulic spreaders couldn't budge it. He shook his head. Never seen anything like it. What about windows? Blackwood built this place like a fortress. Windows in that section are small, reinforced, painted over black on the inside. We could barely get a flashlight beam through. As they spoke, Sarah noticed dark clouds gathering. The forecast hadn't mentioned rain, but springtime weather in the region was notoriously unpredictable. Storms coming, Dawson observed. Need a ride back to town. Sarah hesitated, reluctant to abandon her work, but a distant rumble of thunder decided for her. I suppose I should call it a day. As they walked to Dawson's cruiser, Sarah felt a strange prickling sensation on the back of her neck. Turning, she saw nothing but the motel, yet could have sworn she glimpsed movement behind the window of room 9. The teddy bear in her bag suddenly felt heavier, as if trying to pull her back toward the room it had come from. 2 weeks of back-breaking work had transformed the motel's central office from disaster zone to merely dilapidated. Sarah stood in what would eventually become the new reception area, surveying her progress with satisfaction. The walls had been stripped to the studs, revealing solid bones beneath the fire damage. She'd hired 2 local men brothers who'd recently lost their construction jobs in the next county to help with the heavy lifting. They worked efficiently but kept their distance from room 9, crossing themselves whenever they passed it. Now, alone in the fading afternoon light, Sarah found herself drawn once again to that mysterious door. Unlike the rest of the motel, room 9 remained untouched by her renovation efforts. Its green door stood defiant amid the chaos of reconstruction, the brass number gleaming as if freshly polished. Sarah approached with the ring of keys she'd discovered in the old office safe. She'd tried each one in various locks around the property, identifying most but finding none that fit. Room 9. Let's try again, she murmured to herself, methodically inserting each key into the lock. None turned. Frustrated, Sarah placed her palm flat against the door's surface. As happened each time she touched it, warmth spread up her arm, and the baby grew still within her. "What are you?" she whispered to the door. "What's inside you that's so important?" The temperature around her dropped suddenly, strange for a May afternoon. Sarah's breath clouded in front of her face, and goosebumps prickled along her arms. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then, just as quickly the sensation passed. The door remained closed, impassive to her curiosity. Sarah stepped back, absently, rubbing her belly. The baby had been unusually quiet lately, moving only when they were near room 9, as if responding to something Sarah couldn't perceive. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The voice startled her. A man in his 50s stood in the partially cleared doorway of the main office, toolbox in hand. His weathered face seemed vaguely familiar. "Hank Jensen," he introduced himself, noticing her confusion. "Elmer's nephew. Said you might need some electrical work done." Sarah relaxed. "Yes, of course. Thank you for coming on short notice." Hank's eyes darted to room 9, then quickly away. "Elmer mentioned you wanted the whole place rewired eventually." "That's the plan. I thought we'd start with the office and the first block of rooms." She gestured to the opposite wing from room 9. "The inspection report said those have the least structural damage." Hank nodded, visibly relieved. "Smart to tackle it in sections. I brought some preliminary tools to check the main breaker panel, see what we're working with." As he set down his toolbox, Sarah noticed his left hand, 3 fingers missing above the knuckle, the skin puckered with old burn scars. Following her gaze, Hank flexed his damaged hand. "Industrial accident. 15 years ago." "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "Don't be. It healed better than the doctors expected." He glanced again at room 9. "That the famous door everyone's talking about?" "Seems to be a local celebrity," Sarah replied. "I can't get it open. None of these keys fit." Hank approached the door cautiously, keeping a professional distance. "Solid oak. Old-school craftsmanship. You don't see doors like this anymore." He ran his good hand along the frame. "No obvious damage despite the fire." "Interesting. Would you try opening it?" Sarah asked, offering the key ring. Hank backed away slightly. "I'm just here for the electrical, Mrs. Mitchell. You're afraid of it." Sarah realized. "Respectful," Hank corrected. "There are things in this world best left alone." He hefted his toolbox. "Now, about that breaker panel." After showing Hank the electrical room, Sarah returned to room 9. Inexplicably drawn back to its silent presence. This time, she pressed her ear against the wood, listening for any sound within. Nothing. Frustrated, she reached for the handle and twisted hard, not expecting any result after countless failed attempts. To her shock, the handle turned partially before catching. Sarah's heart raced. It hadn't moved before, not even a millimeter. Something had changed. She tried again, putting her weight into it. The mechanism inside gave a little more, accompanied by a low grinding sound, as if years of disuse were giving way to persistence. In her excitement, Sarah almost missed the sensation, a flutter, then a forceful kick from the baby, stronger than any movement yet. Then another, and another, each perfectly timed with Sarah's attempts to turn the handle. Sarah gasped, placing both hands on her belly. "You feel it too, don't you?" The baby kicked again, directly beneath her right palm, the hand that had touched the door. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Hank called from the electrical room. "Could you come take a look at something?" Reluctantly, Sarah stepped away from room. As she did, the temperature returned to normal and the baby settled. "We'll be back," she promised the door softly. "Whatever you're hiding, we'll find out soon enough." Behind her, unnoticed, the brass number 9 rotated slightly clockwise, then settled back into place with a barely audible click. The town hall archives smelled of dust and forgotten promises. Sarah sat at a worn wooden table, surrounded by yellowing blueprints and property records. Her back ached from hours of searching through the Pinewood's original construction documents. Finding what you need, Ruth. The librarian, who also maintained the town records, set a cup of herbal tea beside Sarah. Almost, Sarah replied, carefully unfolding what appeared to be the original blueprints from 1952. There's something odd about these plans. Ruth peered over her reading glasses. How so? The motel was built with 20 rooms arranged in a horseshoe, but the spacing is inconsistent. Sarah pointed to the right wing. Rooms 8 and 10 are standard dimensions, but room 9 is larger, with thicker walls and a different foundation structure. Ruth's expression remained carefully neutral. Thomas Blackwood was known to be particular about his construction methods, particular enough to use different materials for just one room. Sarah turned to the materials list attached to the blueprint. The walls of room 9 contain iron filings mixed into the concrete. The door is solid oak, with a core of, she squinted at the faded writing, stabilized mineral composite from the Eastern Quarry. The old Millfield quarry was known for unusual mineral deposits, Ruth offered. They closed it in the 70s after a series of accidents. What kind of accidents? Ruth hesitated. I really shouldn't keep you from your research. Your condition and all, you should rest when you can. As Ruth retreated to her desk, Sarah noticed a small note card that had fallen from between the blueprint pages. In precise handwriting, it read, Room 9 dimensions calculated according to the golden ratio. Placement aligned with magnetic anomaly. Foundation depth, 12 feet. Standard 4 feet. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her doctor. Missed your appointment yesterday. Blood pressure was concerning at last check. Please reschedule ASAP. She'd been so absorbed in the motel renovations that her own health had become secondary. The persistent backaches, swollen ankles and occasional dizziness she'd dismissed as normal pregnancy discomforts. Outside the town hall, Sarah found Mayor Hawkins waiting beside her car. Mrs. Mitchell, he greeted her with artificial warmth. I see you've been exploring our archives. Research for the renovations, Sarah replied, unlocking her car door. I understand your determination, but I'm concerned. His voice lowered. There's been talk around town. People worried about a pregnant woman working in unsafe conditions. I have professionals handling the dangerous work. Jensen Brothers. Not exactly the A-team of construction. Hawkins stepped closer. I have a proposition that might interest you. The town council has authorized me to make an offer on the Pinewood property. 50% above what you paid. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's still significantly below market value for commercial real estate. It's a generous offer considering the condition and, he paused meaningfully, history of the place. What history are you referring to? Specifically. Hawkins's smile tightened. Every old building has its stories. I'm offering you an easy exit from what will surely become a money pit. Think of your child. I am thinking of my child, Sarah replied coolly. And our future. Thank you for the offer, but I'm not selling. That evening, Sarah spread the blueprints across her apartment floor, comparing them with Hank's electrical assessment. The motel's wiring was a patchwork of different eras, but the circuits around room 9 showed an isolated system, connected to the main grid, but with independent surge protection. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. She opened it to find Chief Dawson holding a small white envelope. Found this taped to your car, he explained, handing it to her. Thought you should know someone's leaving notes. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. Stop asking questions about room 9. Some doors should remain closed. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. Threatening a pregnant woman. Classy. Want to file a report? She considered it. Would that accomplish anything? Dawson sighed. Probably not without evidence of who left it. But I'll increase patrols near the motel. After he left, Sarah returned to the blueprints with renewed determination. Someone wanted her to stay away from room 9, which only strengthened her resolve to discover its secrets. As she studied the foundation plans, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room spun momentarily, and sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. Sarah gasped, clutching her belly. The baby, usually active in the evenings, was disturbingly still. Fumbling for her phone, she dialed her doctor's emergency line. As she waited for an answer, her gaze fell on a detail in the blueprints she'd missed before. A notation beside room 9's foundation: incorporates stones from the healing spring. The pain subsided as suddenly as it had appeared, and the baby delivered a reassuring kick. Sarah cancelled the call, her racing heart gradually slowed. Outside her window, a car idled briefly before driving away, its headlights illuminating a familiar figure watching her apartment from across the street before disappearing into the shadows. Morning sunlight filtered through the newly installed windows of the motel office as Sarah carefully unpacked a box of salvaged items. 1 month into renovations, the central building had transformed from charred ruin to promising work in progress. Fresh drywall covered most of the fire damage, and the cleaned reception counter waited for refinishing. Despite her doctor's warnings about overexertion, Sarah had maintained a relentless pace. The growing discomfort of her advancing pregnancy only fueled her determination to make progress before the baby arrived. The bell over the door jingled, a whimsical touch Sarah had installed yesterday. "Well, I'll be," said an elderly voice. "Sounds just like it used to." Sarah turned to find a thin man in his 80s, impeccably dressed in pressed slacks and a cardigan despite the June heat. A vintage leather doctor's bag hung from one gnarled hand. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked. "Dr. William Jenkins," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "Retired now, but I was Millfield's physician for nearly 50 years. He glanced around appreciatively. "You've done wonders already. Thomas would be pleased. You knew the original owner?" "Indeed. Treated his family for decades." The old doctor's eyes twinkled, including the mysterious guests of room 9. Sarah's heart quickened. Finally, someone willing to speak openly about the room. "Please, sit down," she offered, gesturing to one of the folding chairs she'd set up in lieu of proper furniture. "Can I get you some water?" "Thank you, my dear," he settled with the careful movements of advanced age. "I heard about your interest in the motel's history. Thought it might be time someone shared the medical perspective." From his bag, Jenkins withdrew an antique stethoscope, its brass fittings tarnished with age. "This was my first instrument, from medical school in 1958. Used it on my first patient at the Pinewood." Sarah accepted it reverently. "Who was the patient?" "A young woman not unlike yourself, though not expecting." Jenkins stared past Sarah, into memory. "She arrived late one night, barely conscious. Thomas called me in a panic. By the time I arrived, he'd moved her to room 9. What was wrong with her?" "Advanced tuberculosis by my diagnosis, terminal stage." Jenkins shook his head. "I advised immediate transfer to the county hospital, but Thomas refused. Said she'd specifically requested room 9. And then, I returned the next morning, expecting to sign a death certificate." The doctor's voice lowered. "Instead, I found her sitting up in bed. Color returned to her cheeks. Fever gone. Her lungs I'd heard rattling with fluid the night before, sounded clear as a bell through that very stethoscope." Sarah studied the instrument in her hands. "A misdiagnosis." "That's what I told myself," Jenkins admitted, "until it happened again and again. Over the years, I documented 17 cases of inexplicable recoveries in room 9, everything from pneumonia to cancer." "Did you publish your findings?" The doctor laughed softly. "Who would believe me? A country doctor claiming miraculous cures in a roadside motel. I'd have lost my license." His expression sobered. "Besides, Thomas insisted on discretion. He believed too much attention would lead to exploitation." Sarah considered this. "So, the room has some sort of healing property." "I'm a man of science, Mrs. Mitchell. I don't believe in miracles. But in that room," he took back the stethoscope, cradling it like evidence. "In that room, I witnessed recoveries that defied medical explanation. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've seen you at the medical center. Dr. Phillips mentioned concerns about your pregnancy, elevated blood pressure, anemia. His eyes held genuine concern, and because certain people in town would prefer this knowledge remain buried. The mayor. Gerald's father suffered from heart disease. Thomas allowed him to stay in room 9 as a personal favor. Jenkins sighed. The recovery was remarkable, but it changed something in the Hawkins family. They became obsessed with controlling access to the room, eventually trying to purchase the motel outright. Sarah thought of the mayor's persistent offers. That explains his interest. Partially. The truth is more complicated. Jenkins rose slowly. The room doesn't work for everyone. There are conditions. What kind of conditions? That's what I never determined. He returned the stethoscope to his bag. But I suspect you're close to finding out. The room responds to you. I can see it in how the locals react to your presence here. They sense it. Outside, a car horn honked impatiently. My daughter, Jenkins explained, doesn't approve of my meddling in ancient history, as she calls it. He shuffled toward the door, then paused. One last thing. After particularly effective treatments, the room would seal itself, sometimes for days, sometimes weeks. No key would open it until it was ready again. Ready for what? For the next person who needed it. Jenkins smiled sadly. Good luck, Mrs. Mitchell. Whatever you discover, remember that healing always comes with a cost. After he left, Sarah found herself drawn once again to room 9. The door remained obstinately closed, but for the first time she thought she understood its purpose. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby shift within. Are you the key? She whispered. Is that why you respond when we're near it? As if in answer, a sound came from within the room, soft but distinct, the rhythmic beating of a heart. Sarah knelt on the newly installed office carpet, surrounded by broken pieces of metal. For 2 hours, she had been attempting to reassemble what appeared to be an old master key discovered behind the former reception desk. The teeth were snapped off, the bow bent at an odd angle, yet something about it felt significant. That looks like a lost cause, remarked Elmer, who had stopped by with a delivery of light fixtures. Probably, Sarah admitted, wincing as she shifted her weight. At 35 weeks pregnant, even simple movements had become challenging. But it's different from the other keys. Look at the unusual grooves. Elmer adjusted his glasses. That's Thomas Blackwood's master key. Thought it was lost in the fire. Sarah's excitement rose. The master would open all rooms, including room 9. That was the theory. Elmer said, his tone cautious, though I never saw Thomas use it on that particular door. He had other methods for room 9. What methods? Elmer busied himself unpacking light fixtures. Can't rightly say. Some things Thomas kept to himself. Sarah carefully placed the broken pieces in a small box. I'm going to see if it can be repaired. Good luck with that, Elmer chuckled. Keys that intricate aren't made anymore. You'd need an old-school locksmith with specialized equipment. That afternoon, Sarah visited Millfield's only locksmith, a surly man named Peterson, whose cluttered shop smelled of metal filings and machine oil. He examined the broken pieces with visible discomfort. Where'd you find this? At the Pinewood. I think it might be the original master key. Peterson immediately pushed the pieces away. Can't help you. You haven't even tried, Sarah protested. Don't need to. That's a Thanatos 7-pin security system. Nobody makes the blanks anymore, and I don't have the equipment to cut something that complex. His tone left no room for negotiation. Besides, some locks are better left unopened. Outside, Sarah's frustration mounted. Another dead end, another person in town unwilling to help or hiding something about room. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ruth, the librarian. Found something you should see. Can you come by? At the library, Ruth led Sarah to the reference section, where she'd laid out several leather-bound volumes. Town records from the 1950s, Ruth explained. I've been digging since you asked about the quarry. Look at this. She opened a guest registry book. Not from the library but from the Pinewood itself. This was donated to our historical collection after Thomas died. The yellowed pages showed meticulous entries spanning decades. Ruth pointed to a recurring name. Elizabeth Harlow appeared every third month from 1952 to 1967, always in room 9, always for exactly 3 nights. I cross-referenced with medical records that Dr. Jenkins donated, Ruth continued, showing Sarah another book. Elizabeth Harlow suffered from a degenerative bone disease. Terminal diagnosis in 1951, yet she lived another 16 years, far exceeding medical expectations. Sarah studied the registry. She wasn't the only repeat visitor to room 9. Several names appeared multiple times, always in the same room. I noticed that too, Ruth agreed. And this, she indicated a small symbol beside certain entries, a circle with a line through it. This marks guests who arrived in poor health. The ones without the symbol showed no obvious illness. Why would healthy people specifically request that room? Ruth lowered her voice, though they were alone, not for themselves. The town gossip was that they brought others, people too sick to sign the registry. People seeking treatments not sanctioned by medical authorities, like experimental drugs. Sarah asked, or something else entirely. Ruth hesitated. There's one more thing. She carefully extracted a newspaper clipping tucked between the registry pages, an obituary for Thomas Blackwood from 1983. Survived by his wife Margaret and daughter Rebecca, Sarah read aloud. I thought Thomas didn't have children. Rebecca wasn't his biological child, Ruth explained. In 1952, a young woman passed through Millfield, deathly ill and 8 months pregnant. Thomas took her into room 9. The mother died in childbirth, but the infant survived against all odds. Thomas and Margaret adopted her. Rebecca, Sarah whispered, her hand instinctively cradling her own unborn child. The timing matches the first appearance of the Harlow woman in the registry, Ruth pointed out. Some speculated she was a relative, checking on the child. As Sarah processed this information, a sudden realization struck her. The room doesn't just heal, she murmured. It preserves life at a cost. Ruth nodded solemnly. That was the rumor. A life for a life, though not always through death. Sometimes through service, dedication, like Thomas becoming the room's caretaker. Sarah suggested, precisely, and each guardian choosing their successor. Ruth closed the registry gently. The question is, why has the room chosen you? Back at the motel, Sarah approached room 9 with new purpose, the broken pieces of the master key clutched in her hand. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the renovated portions of the property. Standing before the green door, Sarah felt the familiar warmth spreading up her arm as she touched the wood. The baby kicked vigorously. I understand now, she said softly to the door. You're waiting for the right person, the right time. She pressed the broken key against the lock, not expecting it to work, simply making a connection. To her astonishment, the pieces seemed to grow warm, almost vibrating against her palm. A low metallic groan emanated from the lock mechanism. The brass number 9 rotated clockwise, then counterclockwise, settling at a slight angle. The broken key pieces suddenly felt hot, almost too hot to hold. Sarah gasped, nearly dropping them as they began to shift in her hand, the metal seemingly trying to reform itself. From inside room 9 came a sound like distant singing, a woman's voice, gentle and reassuring. The melody was a lullaby, one that Sarah somehow knew, though she'd never heard it before. Late evening shadows stretched across the motel office as Sarah carefully turned the pages of a leather-bound guest register she'd discovered in a waterproof lockbox beneath the floorboards. Unlike the partial records Ruth had shown her at the library, this was the complete registry from the Pinewood's first 3 decades. Thomas Blackwood's private record. Each entry was meticulously detailed, names, dates, room numbers, but also notations that seemed to be health assessments. Stage 4 lymphoma, improved after 3 nights. Congenital heart defect, partial repair achieved. Stroke, paralysis, mobility restored 60%. The most frequent entries were for room 9, where the outcomes were consistently miraculous for certain guests, while others showed no improvement. Sarah couldn't discern the pattern determining who benefited and who didn't. As she reached the 1960s section, a name jumped out: Gerald Hawkins Sr., cardiac arrest survivor, full recovery, room 9. Note: son present throughout stay. The current mayor would have been a teenager then, watching his father recover miraculously. No wonder he was so interested in the property. Most intriguing were the recurring visits from E.H. Elizabeth Harlow, always with the notation, caretaker visit, rather than health concerns. Following each of her stays, room 9 remained vacant for exactly 7 days, marked with a simple notation, recharging. A knock at the door startled Sarah from her reading. Chief Dawson stood outside, flashlight in hand. Working late, he observed as Sarah let him in. Lights look good from the highway. Finishing touches on the first block of rooms, Sarah explained, discreetly closing the registry. Another week, I might be ready for a soft opening. Dawson nodded appreciatively. Progress is impressive, though I noticed room 9 remains untouched. Saving it for last, Sarah said carefully. Smart. Build momentum with the easier wins. He glanced at her pregnant belly. How much longer? 5 weeks, give or take. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. The baby had been unusually active all day. And the doctor's concerns about your blood pressure. Word traveled fast in small towns. Manageable with rest and medication. Dawson didn't look convinced. The reason I stopped by, there's been another incident. What kind of incident? Someone broke into your apartment earlier today. Mrs. Finch next door noticed the door ajar and called it in. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her belly. Was anything taken? Nothing obvious according to Mrs. Finch. But you should check yourself. I've got a patrol car watching your place tonight. After Dawson left, Sarah returned to her apartment to find it subtly disturbed. Drawers slightly open, books misaligned on shelves. The intruder had searched methodically but taken nothing of obvious value. Then she noticed Michael's silver watch was missing from her nightstand. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the motel to find Mayor Hawkins waiting, his expensive SUV parked prominently in the newly graveled lot. Mrs. Mitchell, he greeted with rehearsed concern. I heard about the break-in. Small towns aren't as safe as they once were. What do you want, Mayor? To increase my offer. He named a figure nearly double her purchase price. The town council has approved emergency funds for a historical preservation initiative. The Pinewood suddenly has historical significance. It always has, Hawkins admitted. My father would have died if not for Thomas Blackwood and that room. So he was finally acknowledging the truth. Yet you've fought my renovation at every turn, because you don't understand what you've stumbled into. His jovial mask slipped, revealing genuine anxiety. That room requires specific knowledge, specific lineage to manage properly. The Blackwood family trained successors for generations, like Elizabeth Harlow. Hawkins looked startled. You've done your homework. Yes, Elizabeth was Rebecca Blackwood's biological aunt, and part of the room's legacy. After Thomas died, she continued as caretaker until age made it impossible. Then, who took over? That's complicated. Hawkins looked uncomfortable. The succession wasn't properly completed. The last owner, Harrington, was Elizabeth's grandson, but he lacked the necessary connection. When the fire happened, he abandoned the responsibility. And now the room has chosen me, Sarah said quietly. That's what you're afraid of. Hawkins studied her with new respect. The room doesn't choose randomly, Mrs. Mitchell. It selects based on need and capacity for sacrifice. He glanced at her belly. Your condition makes you especially receptive, but also vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? The room demands balance. Healing requires energy, life force, if you will. Minor healings take only a little, but major ones, he trailed off. Require a life, Sarah finished, like Rebecca's mother. Hawkins nodded grimly. Or significant life energy from a caretaker. Elizabeth aged decades in the years she served the room. Why tell me this now? Because you're going to open that door soon. I feel it. Hawkins handed her a business card. When you do, call me immediately. Day or night. There are protocols, preparations. As Hawkins drove away, Sarah noticed something gleaming in the dirt near where he'd parked. Michael's watch, apparently dropped by whoever had searched her apartment. The second hand was moving again, though the watch had been stopped since the accident. The ventilation system in room 8 had revealed an unexpected treasure. As Hank removed the rusted grate to install new ductwork, a packet of yellowed envelopes tumbled into Sarah's waiting hands. They were bound with faded blue ribbon, the topmost envelope addressed simply to the next guardian. Now, seated in the partially renovated motel office, Sarah carefully opened the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, but shaky, the penmanship of someone elderly or infirm. To whoever finds this, she read aloud to the empty room. My name is Elizabeth Harlow, last appointed guardian of room 9. If you're reading this, you have been drawn to the Pinewood, perhaps without understanding why. Sarah's heart raced as she continued reading. Elizabeth explained how Thomas Blackwood had discovered the room's properties by accident in 1952, when a pregnant woman near death had taken shelter at the newly built motel during a storm. The child lived, though the mother did not. Elizabeth wrote, "That child was my niece Rebecca, adopted and raised by Thomas and Margaret Blackwood." What Thomas didn't understand initially was that the room had merely transferred life energy from mother to child, but amplified somehow by the room's unique properties. The second letter detailed Thomas's subsequent experiments, placing various ill travelers in room 9, documenting their recoveries, studying the conditions that seemed to affect outcomes. Thomas discovered that the room's power came from the unusual mineral composition in its walls, quarried from a specific vein in Millfield that local indigenous people had long considered sacred healing ground. The third letter made Sarah gasp. The room does not create healing energy, it transfers and amplifies it. Every healing requires a donor, willing or unwitting. Minor ailments might draw small amounts of energy from multiple sources. Thomas found nearby guests often reported unusual fatigue after miraculous recoveries occurred in room 9, but major healings required dedicated donors. Elizabeth explained how she had volunteered to become a donor after Rebecca developed leukemia as a teenager. I gave what I could, my youth, my vitality channeled through the room to save my niece. The cost was high. I aged decades in those 3 days, but Rebecca lived a full life because of it. The fourth letter outlined the Guardian protocols, specific conditions for using room 9 safely. The room required recharging periods between healings. It needed regular maintenance from someone with bloodline connection to previous guardian, and most importantly, it needed protection from those who would exploit its power. The Hawkins family has coveted control since Gerald Sr. was healed. Elizabeth wrote, they envision a profitable enterprise selling miraculous cures to the wealthy and desperate, but the room resists commercialization. It chooses its own patients and its own guardians. The final letter, dated just months before the fire, contained a warning. I fear what comes next. My grandson James lacks the temperament for guardianship, but the bloodline connection makes him sensitive to the room's energy. He speaks of modernizing the operation, of willing donors compensated for their contribution. He doesn't understand that the room itself decides. It's not a tool to be wielded, but a trust to be honored. A postscript had been added in shakier handwriting. If you found these letters, you are likely the room's chosen successor. It doesn't select randomly. Look to your own needs, your own connections. The room may offer healing, but always at a price you must understand before accepting. Sarah set the letters down, her mind racing. Was this why her pregnancy symptoms improved near room 9? Was the room somehow connecting with her unborn child? Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the office window she saw several vehicles parking haphazardly in the lot. Mayor Hawkins emerged from the lead car, accompanied by members of the town council and a man in an expensive suit carrying legal documents. Sarah tucked Elizabeth's letters into her pocket and stepped outside to meet them. "Mrs. Mitchell," Hawkins began without preamble. "This is Mr. Livingston, the town attorney. He's prepared an injunction against your continued renovation." "On what grounds?" Sarah demanded. "Public safety," replied Livingston smoothly. "We have concerns about structural integrity, asbestos remediation, and compliance with historical preservation statutes." "This is harassment," Sarah said. "My permits are in order." "Perhaps," Hawkins interjected, "but an inspection will still halt work for weeks, while experts evaluate. Unless you'd consider our revised offer." He named a figure nearly triple her purchase price. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The stress, the heat, the advancing pregnancy, all suddenly overwhelming. She staggered slightly, grabbing the doorframe for support. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you all right?" One of the council members stepped forward with genuine concern. The world tilted alarmingly. Sarah was vaguely aware of someone calling for an ambulance, of being helped to a chair. Through the haze, she saw Hawkins watching her, not with concern, but with calculation. As consciousness began to fade, Sarah felt something else, a pulling sensation toward room 9. The room was responding to her distress, drawing her toward it. With the last of her strength, Sarah pushed away those trying to help and stumbled toward the green door. Elizabeth's letters clutched in her hand like a talisman. Behind her, Hawkins called out in alarm, "Stop her, don't let her open that door." But his words seemed to come from very far away, as Sarah's fingers closed around the doorknob of room 9. The ancient medical textbook felt heavy in Sarah's lap as she sat in the hospital bed, its leather binding cracked with age. Doc Jenkins had brought it during his unexpected visit, smuggling it past the nurses with a conspiratorial wink. "Published in 1897, he explained. "My great-grandfather's. Contains his personal notes on the mineral properties of the Millfield region." Sarah's fingers traced the handwritten annotations in the margins beside a chapter on therapeutic minerals. "This is about room 9, isn't it?" "Not explicitly," Jenkins replied, glancing at the door to ensure their privacy. "But it explains the science behind what you experienced." 3 days had passed since Sarah collapsed at the motel. She remembered reaching for room 9's doorknob, then nothing until waking in the hospital with an IV in her arm and fetal monitors strapped to her belly. Phillips had been blunt. Severe preeclampsia, dangerously high blood pressure, the baby in distress. Bed rest was mandatory, early delivery likely. Yet within hours, her condition had inexplicably stabilized. The medical staff seemed baffled by her rapid improvement. "You touched the door," Jenkins said, not as a question but a confirmation. "The room responded to your distress. How is that possible?" Sarah asked. "I didn't even open it. The minerals in that room don't require an open door to function. Proximity is sometimes enough, especially for someone the room has selected." Jenkins tapped a page in the textbook. "Look here." The page detailed a rare mineral compound found in an underground spring beneath Millfield Quarry, unusual crystalline structures with electromagnetic properties that indigenous people had used for healing rituals. "The quarry was on Blackwood land," Jenkins continued. "Thomas discovered the mineral deposits while digging the motel's foundation. He incorporated the stones into room 9's construction walls, floor, ceiling, essentially built a mineral amplification chamber." "Amplifying what exactly?" "Life energy, for lack of a better term." Jenkins looked uncomfortable with the metaphysical implications. "My great-grandfather documented unusual electromagnetic readings around certain healing springs. Modern science might call it bioelectrical energy, the electrical impulses that power our cells, our hearts, our brains." Sarah thought of the heartbeat she'd heard from within the room. "The room is alive, not alive, but not entirely inert either." The mineral configuration creates a kind of resonance chamber that can transfer energy between individuals under specific conditions. Jenkins hesitated. Your baby, it's a girl, correct? Sarah nodded, surprised by the question. I thought so. The room has always responded more strongly to female energy, particularly maternal connections. Rebecca Blackwood, Elizabeth Harlow, and now you. Jenkins closed the textbook carefully. The succession typically follows maternal lines. Hawkins tried to stop me from opening the door. He seemed afraid, with good reason. Jenkins' expression grew grave. The room's energy transfer isn't without risks. Without proper preparation and understanding, the balance can shift unpredictably. What kind of risks? Before Jenkins could answer, Mayor Hawkins appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame filling the entrance. Dr. Jenkins, he acknowledged coldly. I didn't realize you were making house calls these days. Just visiting an old friend's successor, Jenkins replied, rising slowly. I'll leave you two to talk. As the elderly doctor shuffled out, Hawkins took his seat beside Sarah's bed. You're looking remarkably improved. No thanks to your ambush at the motel, Sarah responded, keeping her voice level. The doctor says stress triggered my condition, and yet here you are, recovering with unusual speed. Hawkins leaned closer. The room helped you, didn't it? Even through the door. Sarah remained silent, unwilling to confirm his suspicions. I'm not your enemy, Mrs. Mitchell, Hawkins sighed. I'm trying to protect you from forces you don't fully understand. Like you protected James Harrington. Elizabeth's letters mentioned your family's interest in commercializing Room 9. Hawkins flinched at Harrington's name. James was reckless. He ignored the protocols, tried to force the room to heal a dying billionaire who'd promised him millions. His voice lowered. The room rejected the attempt. The backlash triggered the fire. And Harrington disappeared the night of the fire, left a half-burned body that was initially identified as his. Hawkins met her gaze directly. DNA tests later proved it wasn't him. We still don't know whose remains were found or where Harrington went. A chill ran through Sarah despite the warm hospital room. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand the stakes. Hawkins placed a file folder on her bed. These are copies of the original Guardian protocols. Elizabeth's version was incomplete. If you're determined to continue this path, you should at least be properly prepared. Sarah eyed the folder warily. What's your interest in helping me now? Self-preservation, Hawkins admitted frankly. The room has chosen you. Fighting that selection has consequences. My father taught me that much. He stood to leave. Review the protocols. Call me when you're discharged. And Mrs. Mitchell, his expression softened slightly. Be careful. The room doesn't just heal, it binds. Once you accept guardianship, your life will never be entirely your own again. After Hawkins left, Sarah opened the folder. Inside were detailed instructions for preparing Room 9 for a healing, maintaining its energy balance, and most disturbingly, a list of previous guardians with their lifespans. Those who had actively used the room's power had lived shortened lives, aging prematurely. The most dramatic case was Elizabeth Harlow, who had given 40 years of her life in a single session to save her niece. Sarah placed a protective hand over her unborn daughter, wondering what price the room might someday ask of them both. Raindrops pelted the windshield as Sarah parked behind the motel office. 2 weeks of hospital-mandated bed rest had passed with excruciating slowness, but her body had healed with unusual speed. Even Dr. Phillips had seemed puzzled by her recovery. I've never seen preeclampsia resolve this quickly without delivery, he'd remarked during her final checkup. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. What Sarah was doing was dreaming of Room 9 every night. Vivid dreams of standing inside a space filled with soft blue light, walls pulsing with gentle energy. Sometimes a woman she somehow knew was Elizabeth Harlow would appear, teaching her how to direct the room's power. Sarah shook off the memory as she unlocked the office door. Despite her absence, renovations had continued under Hank's supervision. The reception area now boasted fresh paint, refinished counters, and new lighting. 5 rooms were completely renovated, ready for guests. "Welcome back," called Elmer, emerging from one of the rooms with a toolbox. "Place is coming along nicely. Thanks for keeping things moving," Sarah replied, setting down the folder of documents she'd brought from home. "Is Hank around?" "Electrical inspection in town. Should be back this afternoon." Elmer nodded toward the folder. "More design plans? Something like that." Sarah hesitated, then decided to trust the old man who'd been nothing but supportive. "Actually, they're documents about room 9. The real history." Elmer's bushy eyebrows rose. "Hawkins shared the protocols with you. That's unexpected. You know about them?" "Worked here 40 years, Mrs. Mitchell. Thomas trusted me with some things, not everything." He glanced toward room 9. "That door still hasn't opened." "Not yet. But I think it's close." Sarah picked up the folder. "I need to review these again. Would you mind keeping an eye out for visitors? I'd rather not be interrupted." In the small back office she'd renovated as her workspace, Sarah spread the documents across her desk. The protocols were extensive, 20 pages of handwritten instructions detailing every aspect of Room 9's operation. Most fascinating was a blueprint of the room's unusual construction. The walls contained a precise arrangement of mineral-laden stones from the quarry, creating what the notes called resonance points at specific locations. The bed was positioned at the center of these points, allowing for maximum energy transfer. A knock on the office door interrupted her study. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have visitors," Elmer called. Sarah emerged to find Ruth from the library, accompanied by an elderly woman in a wheelchair. The woman's frail appearance contrasted with alert, intelligent eyes that locked onto Sarah immediately. "This is Margaret Blackwood," Ruth explained. "Thomas's widow." Sarah's breath caught. "Mrs. Blackwood, I had no idea you were still in Millfield." "I live with my daughter in the next county," Margaret replied, her voice surprisingly strong. "Ruth told me about your work here, about your interest in room 9. Please, come into the office," Sarah invited, helping Ruth maneuver the wheelchair through the doorway. Once settled, Margaret studied Sarah with unnerving intensity. "You're further along than I expected. The room must be responding strongly to your pregnancy. You know about the room's properties. I was married to its creator for 40 years, Margaret said with a hint of amusement. "Thomas tried to keep his research secret at first, but there are no secrets in marriage." Her expression grew serious. "I understand Gerald has given you the protocols." Sarah nodded. "They're extensive, but still leave questions." "The protocols address the mechanics, not the ethics," Margaret agreed. "That part Thomas never wrote down. Too dangerous if the wrong people found it." From her purse, Margaret withdrew a slim leather diary. This was Thomas's private journal, his moral framework for deciding who the room would help. She placed it on the desk. "I've kept it safe, waiting for the next true guardian." Sarah accepted the journal reverently. "Why give this to me? We've never met." "Because the room has chosen you. I feel it." Margaret's gaze drifted to Sarah's belly. "And because your situation mirrors what brought us Rebecca, the pregnant woman who died in childbirth," Sarah whispered. "Her name was Catherine," Margaret said softly. "She arrived during a snowstorm, already in labor, but something was wrong. The baby was breech, and Catherine was bleeding internally." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "The room was just another motel room then, or so we thought. Catherine insisted on staying there, refused to go to the hospital. Said she'd had a dream about the room saving her baby. And it did," Sarah said, "at the cost of her life. What we didn't understand then was that Catherine knew what would happen. She chose to give her remaining life energy to save her child." Margaret's voice trembled slightly. Only later, when others experienced the room's power, did Thomas realize what had occurred. A loud crash of thunder punctuated her words, and the lights flickered momentarily. The storm was intensifying outside. "Margaret, we should go," Ruth urged, glancing worriedly at the darkening sky. The forecast mentioned possible flooding. Margaret nodded reluctantly. One last thing, Mrs. Mitchell. The room has limitations. It cannot create energy, only transfer it. Remember that when the time comes to make your own choice. As Ruth wheeled Margaret toward the door, the elderly woman turned back. Catherine's full name was Catherine Elizabeth Harlow. Elizabeth was her sister, who later became guardian to honor her sacrifice. Her penetrating gaze met Sarah's. The room favors those willing to sacrifice for others. It seems that quality runs in your family too. Sarah froze. My family, but a sudden gust of wind flung the door open, and in the confusion of Ruth hurrying Margaret to their car through the downpour, the question remained unanswered. By the time Sarah returned to her office, rain was battering the windows. She opened Thomas's journal with trembling hands, and a small photograph fluttered out, a black and white image of a young woman standing proudly in front of the newly built Pinewood Motel. Written on the back, Catherine Harlow Mitchell, 1952. Sarah's grandmother's name had been Catherine Mitchell. Dr. Phillips stared at the ultrasound monitor with undisguised confusion. I don't understand this, he muttered, adjusting the wand on Sarah's rounded belly for a better angle. Is something wrong with the baby? Sarah asked, anxiety tightening her chest. Not wrong, exactly. The doctor captured several more images before setting the wand aside. 2 weeks ago, we were monitoring several concerning developmental issues. The irregular heartbeat, the potential lung underdevelopment, the kidney anomaly we discussed. He gestured to the screen. They've all resolved. Completely. Sarah feigned surprise, though privately she'd suspected this outcome. After discovering her familial connection to Room 9, she'd spent every day at the motel, working primarily in rooms adjacent to the mysterious chamber. Each night, she'd pressed her palm against the green door before leaving, feeling the now familiar warmth spread up her arm and into her body. Sometimes these things correct themselves, she suggested. Dr. Phillips removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Not typically this dramatically or this completely. He pulled up previous scans on his computer. Compare the heart development from 2 weeks ago to today. This kind of improvement usually takes months, not days. The differences were striking even to Sarah's untrained eye. The previous scan showed an irregularly shaped heart. Today's revealed perfect chambers and vessels. I'm glad the baby's healthy, Sarah said carefully. That's what matters, right? Of course. Philip still looked troubled, but as your doctor, I need to understand what changed. Have you been taking any supplements, alternative treatments, anything not on your chart? Sarah thought of Room 9's energy flowing through her, nurturing her child, just rest and good nutrition, like you recommended. Phillips clearly wasn't satisfied, but didn't press further. Well, whatever you're doing, your daughter is now one of the healthiest fetuses I've seen at 37 weeks. Perfect development across all markers. He handed her printed images of the scan. I'd still like to see you weekly until delivery, which should be right on schedule in about 3 weeks. Outside the medical center, Sarah studied the ultrasound images in her car. The perfect profile of her daughter's face, the clearly defined spine, the detailed chambers of the tiny heart, all evidence of Room 9's influence. But at what cost? Who or what had provided the energy for this healing? Sarah drove to the motel, questions swirling in her mind. The parking lot now boasted fresh gravel and newly painted lines for 6 parking spaces. The renovated office gleamed with fresh paint, and a hand-carved wooden sign proclaimed "Office Open. Inquire about rooms." Elmer had been handling walk-in inquiries, while Sarah attended her appointment. As she entered, he was explaining rates to a middle-aged couple. Mrs. Mitchell, the owner, Elmer introduced her. Just had our first booking for next weekend when we officially open. Couple passing through to visit their granddaughter. Sarah smiled and completed the reservation, surprised by how normal it felt, as if the Pinewood were just an ordinary motel rather than a structure harboring a mysterious healing room. After the couple left, Sarah retreated to her office and pulled out Thomas Blackwood's journal. She'd been studying it nightly, trying to understand his ethical framework for using Room 9. His entries revealed a cautious, thoughtful man wrestling with the moral implications of controlling such power. "The room chooses its patients," he'd written repeated. "I merely facilitate the connection." But how did the room choose? Thomas had developed theories about emotional resonance, need and worthiness, but admitted these were merely attempts to rationalize patterns he observed. One passage particularly haunted Sarah: "The room's greatest power comes with greatest cost. Catherine gave everything for Rebecca. I've given years of my life in smaller increments for others. The room keeps a perfect accounting, every healing paid in full." A knock interrupted her reading. Chief Dawson stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Something you should know." Sarah nodded, setting aside the journal. "James Harrington's been spotted in town," Dawson said without preamble. "At least someone matching his description. Clerk at the gas station recognized him buying supplies yesterday." "The former owner? I thought he disappeared after the fire." "He did. 2 years with no trace. Now suddenly back when you're about to reopen." Dawson's concern was evident. "Might be coincidence, but you don't believe in coincidences," Sarah finished. "Could he be dangerous?" "Hard to say. According to records, he inherited the motel when Elizabeth Harlow died, but from what I gather, he wasn't her chosen successor for the special aspects of the property." Dawson chose his words carefully, acknowledging without directly stating his awareness of Room 9's powers. "The guardian role," Sarah supplied. "Elizabeth's letters suggested he wanted to commercialize the room's abilities." Dawson nodded. "Whatever his plans, they ended with the fire. If he's back now, he must have a reason." He handed Sarah a business card. "My personal number. Call Airkine day or night, if you see him or anything suspicious." After Dawson left, Sarah returned to the journal, but found herself too distracted to focus. Instead, she walked the renovated section of the motel, admiring the transformation from ruin to functional business. 6 rooms now stood ready, the exterior repainted, new fixtures gleaming. As always, her inspection circuit ended at Room 9. Today, the green door seemed to pulse subtly, as if breathing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. When Sarah placed her palm against the wood, the warmth was immediate and intense. From within her womb, her daughter kicked powerfully, directly beneath her right hand. The hand connected to Room 9, a perfect communication triangle. Room to mother to child. "What are you trying to tell me?" Sarah whispered to the door. In response, the brass number 9 rotated slowly clockwise until it hung horizontally, forming an infinity symbol. The attic storage room above the motel office yielded one final secret. While installing new insulation, Hank had discovered a small metal lockbox tucked beneath the rafters. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a tarnished brass key, unlike any Sarah had seen before. Larger and more intricate than standard door keys, with unusual teeth and an ornate bow shaped like intertwined vines. Engraved on the bow were the words, "Aperit plus quam ostium," Latin for, "It opens more than doors." Sarah sat in her office, turning the key over in her hands. After all these months of searching, the original key to Room 9 had literally been above her head the entire time. A soft knock interrupted her contemplation. Ruth stood in the doorway, looking anxious. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," the librarian said, "but there's something you need to see." She placed a manila folder on Sarah's desk. Town records from 1952, specifically property surveys before the motel was built. Sarah opened the folder to find yellowed survey maps. "What am I looking for?" Ruth pointed to a notation near where Room 9 would eventually stand. "Aquifer access point, anomalous mineral content, restricted." "Restricted by whom?" Sarah asked. "That's what's interesting. These surveys were commissioned by Mitchell Mining Company." Ruth watched Sarah's reaction carefully. "Your grandfather's company?" Sarah's breath caught. My grandfather owned the land before Thomas Blackwood? He sold it specifically to Thomas after preliminary mining surveys revealed the unusual mineral deposits. The sale included unusual stipulations about preservation of the underground spring and construction requirements. The implications settled over Sarah like a physical weight. My grandmother wasn't just a random guest who happened to need room 9. She came here deliberately. It appears your family has been connected to this place from the beginning, Ruth agreed. Which makes this all the more concerning. She pulled a newspaper from her bag. Today's front page. The Millfield Gazette's headline read, "Luxury Resort Development Announced for Historic Quarry Site." Below was a photo of Mayor Hawkins, shaking hands with a man whose face was partially obscured. That's James Harrington, Ruth said, pointing to the obscured figure. The article announces a partnership between Hawkins Development and Harrington Enterprises to create a wellness resort, utilizing unique local mineral properties for therapeutic purposes. Sarah skimmed the article with growing alarm. The development would include the quarry site and adjacent properties with historical significance, a thinly veiled reference to the Pinewood. They can't take my property, Sarah insisted. I own the motel legally. The article mentions potential eminent domain proceedings for critical infrastructure access. Ruth's expression was grave. They're positioning the development as essential to the town's economic future. Sarah felt the baby shift restlessly, responding to her agitation. Why would Hawkins partner with Harrington? He seemed to distrust him. Politics makes strange bedfellows, Ruth sighed, especially when millions are at stake. The resort proposal promises 200 jobs and significant tax revenue. After Ruth left, Sarah sat with the key clutched in her palm, its metal warming against her skin. Her thoughts raced with implications, her family's connection to the land, Hawkins' sudden alliance with Harrington, the timing of the announcement, just days before the motel's official reopening. She needed answers, and there was only one place to find them. Standing before room 9, Sarah held the key to its lock for the first time. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a summer storm approaching as twilight descended. I understand now, she said softly to the door. My grandmother knew about you. My family helped create you. This isn't coincidence. It's inheritance. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease, as if the mechanism had been waiting for precisely this moment. When Sarah turned it, the click was barely audible, yet seemed to resonate through the entire building. The door swung open silently, revealing a perfectly preserved room that time and fire had somehow never touched. Unlike the mid-century decor Sarah had expected, room 9's interior was almost clinical in its simplicity. White walls, bare wooden floor, a single bed centered beneath a domed ceiling, embedded with what appeared to be crystalline stones arranged in a spiraling pattern. No windows, though a soft blue light seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, requiring no obvious electrical source. Most striking was the complete absence of damage. No smoke marks, no water stains, no signs that a devastating fire had consumed much of the building around it. As Sarah stepped across the threshold, the air felt different, thicker, charged with potential. The temperature was neither warm nor cool, but perfectly neutral. The room smelled faintly of ozone, like the air after lightning strikes. The door swung closed behind her of its own accord, the lock engaging with a decisive click. Sarah should have felt trapped, but instead experienced an overwhelming sense of homecoming, as if every moment of her life had been leading to this room. On the simple wooden table beside the bed lay a leather-bound book. Its cover bore no title, but when Sarah opened it, she found page after page of names and dates, a record of everyone who had ever been healed in room 9, beginning with Rebecca Blackwood, infant, July 1952, and ending with the most recent entry in Elizabeth Harlow's shaky handwriting, Gerald Hawkins Jr., Hart, May 3, 2021. The mayor had been healed here just weeks before the fire. He'd never mentioned being a patient himself. As Sarah processed this revelation, the blue light in the room intensified. The crystalline stones in the ceiling began to glow, and the air hummed with energy. From outside came the sound of vehicles arriving, doors slamming, voices raised in urgency. Someone pounded on the motel office door, calling Sarah's name. Mayor Hawkins' voice, uncharacteristically desperate. But within room 9, Sarah felt only perfect calm as the energy in the room continued to build around her, embracing her like a long-lost friend, finally returned home. A photograph in a tarnished silver frame sat on Mayor Hawkins' desk, a young boy of perhaps 7, standing proudly in front of the Pinewood Motel's original neon sign. The date stamp in the corner read July 1982. What made the image remarkable was the boy's condition: one arm in a cast, a hospital bracelet still visible on his wrist, yet his face glowed with vibrant health. That was me, 3 days after a car accident that should have killed me, Hawkins explained, turning the frame towards Sarah. Internal bleeding, punctured lung. Doctors gave me hours to live. Then my father brought me to room 9. Sarah studied the image, noticing Thomas Blackwood standing in the background, watching the boy with a mixture of pride and concern. You never mentioned you were a patient yourself. Some experiences defy explanation. Hawkins' usual political polish had vanished, replaced by raw honesty. I was unconscious when they brought me in, but I remember sensations, blue light, voices singing, my broken bones knitting back together. 2 days had passed since Sarah had entered room 9. She'd emerged after only 20 minutes inside, but those minutes had transformed her understanding completely. Now she sat across from Hawkins in his town hall office, having requested this meeting to address the resort development plans. Why partner with Harrington? Sarah asked. You know what he tried to do, how he abused the room's power. Hawkins' shoulders sagged, aging him visibly. Desperation. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with the same heart condition that nearly killed my father. The room saved him, but you need a guardian to facilitate the healing, Sarah finished. And with Elizabeth gone and Harrington disappeared, I had no access, Hawkins confirmed. Then you arrived, clearly chosen by the room. I thought if I helped you understand your role, you might... He trailed off. Use the room to heal you, Sarah concluded. But when I resisted your guidance, Harrington resurfaced with his resort proposal, promising access to the quarry's minerals. A diluted version of Room 9's power, but better than nothing. Hawkins gestured helplessly. Politics is about survival, Mrs. Mitchell, sometimes literally. Sarah absorbed this revelation, pieces falling into place. The construction permits for his resort were approved unusually quickly. I expedited them, Hawkins admitted, in exchange for priority treatment once the facility opens, and the eminent domain threat against my property. Harrington's idea. I've been stalling him. Hawkins leaned forward earnestly. I don't want to take your motel. I want to preserve Room 9 as it was meant to be used, selective, careful, ethical. Harrington's mass-market approach will dilute its power, maybe destroy it entirely, yet you partnered with him anyway. I'm dying, Mrs. Mitchell. The blunt admission hung between them. The medications buy time, but my heart is failing. When faced with extinction, principles become negotiable. Sarah considered the desperate man before her, seeing beyond the political facade to someone terrified of his mortality. She thought of the ledger in Room 9, generations of healings recorded in fading ink. Show me your medical records, she said finally. The complete file. Hawkins blinked in surprise. You'd consider helping me? After everything? I'm considering understanding the full picture before making any decisions, Sarah corrected. Starting with verification of your condition. As Hawkins retrieved his medical file from a desk drawer, Sarah's phone chimed with a text from Elmer. Man asking questions about you at the motel. Matches Harrington's description. Didn't like that room 9 door was closed. Left angry. Sarah's concern must have shown on her face because Hawkins paused. Problem. Harrington was at the motel, Sarah replied, showing him the message. Looking for room 9, Hawkins' expression darkened. He's getting impatient. The investors expect access to the proprietary mineral therapy he's promised them. He handed Sarah a thick medical folder. My complete records. The latest echocardiogram is on top. As Sarah reviewed the documents, the severity of Hawkins' condition became clear. His heart was operating at less than 40% capacity, with multiple blocked arteries and structural damage from a previous heart attack. Why not conventional treatment? Bypass surgery? Transplant? Too risky given my overall condition, Hawkins explained. And the waiting list for transplants. He shook his head. Room 9 is my best hope, just as it was for my father. Sarah closed the file. Decision made. Come to the motel tomorrow morning, alone. No promises, but I'll consider facilitating a session. Relief washed over Hawkins' face. Thank you. And Harrington's development. One problem at a time, Sarah cautioned, rising to leave. But I recommend reconsidering your partnership. Room 9's power isn't meant to be commercialized. As Sarah drove back to the motel, her mind raced with implications. Room 9 had shown her its history, its purpose, its limitations. The healing energy required balance, a donor for every recipient. Minor healings could draw from multiple sources, but major interventions like Hawkins would require needed. Sarah placed one hand protectively over her belly. The baby kicked reassuringly, as if understanding her thoughts. At the motel, Sarah found Elmer waiting anxiously. Harrington left this, he said, handing her a business card with a handwritten note. We need to discuss our mutual interests. The room's potential is being wasted. Sarah tucked the card away. Did he try to enter room 9? Tried the handle, but it's locked tight since you went in. Elmer hesitated. There's something else. After he left, I found this wedged in the office door frame. He handed Sarah a faded Polaroid photograph. It showed a much younger Harrington standing beside a small boy, perhaps 5 or 6, in what was clearly room 9. The boy's resemblance to Harrington was unmistakable, written on the back in Elizabeth. Harlow's handwriting, James and David after healing. Cost, 10 years. The pain began shortly after midnight, a sudden, sharp contraction that jolted Sarah from restless sleep. She'd been dreaming of room 9 again, the crystalline ceiling swirling with blue light, voices whispering just beyond comprehension. Too early, she gasped, fumbling for her phone. 38 weeks pregnant meant the baby wasn't technically premature, but Sarah's birth plan involved a hospital 20 miles away, not a half-renovated motel during a thunderstorm. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating her small apartment as she dialed her doctor. Another contraction hit as the call connected to the answering service. Dr. Phillips, please, she managed. Sarah Mitchell. I think I'm in labor. The response came through static-filled reception. Severe weather advisory. Roads flooded. Emergency services operating at reduced capacity. Between contractions, Sarah dressed and gathered her hospital bag. Rain pounded against the windows with unnatural intensity as she made her way to her car, only to discover the street outside her. Apartment already submerged in several inches of rising water. Emergency services, a dispatcher answered. When Sarah called 911, we have multiple weather emergencies in progress. What's your situation? Labor, possibly early stage, Sarah explained. I need transport to Riverside Hospital. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but Riverside is inaccessible. The bridge is underwater. The dispatcher's voice was professionally calm but strained. We've got all ambulances deployed for life-threatening emergencies. Where are you located? Millfield. Oak Street Apartments. That area's predicted to flood further. Can you get to higher ground? When Sarah hesitated, the dispatcher continued. The community center on Hill Street is serving as an emergency shelter. They have medical personnel. Can someone drive you? Sarah thought of her options. Few neighbors had cars, and those who did had likely already evacuated. Elmer lived on the other side of town. Hank had mentioned heading to his brother's farm for the weekend. I have access to a location on higher ground, Sarah said finally. The Pinewood Motel on Route 27. It's on the ridge above town. The old motel? That's perfect. It's designated as a secondary shelter location if needed. Get there if you can, and we'll dispatch medical help when available. As the call ended, another contraction gripped Sarah, stronger than before. Timing them with her phone's app, she realized they were coming every 12 minutes. Early labor, but progressing faster than expected for a first pregnancy. The motel was just over a mile away, walkable under normal circumstances, but challenging through flooded streets in a thunderstorm while in labor. Still, it was her best option. Sarah shouldered her hospital bag and grabbed a flashlight. The storm's ferocity seemed almost personal as she waded through knee-deep water, using parked cars and fences for support during contractions. By the time the motel's silhouette appeared on the ridge, Sarah was soaked and exhausted. Contractions were now 8 minutes apart, her breath coming in labored gasps as she climbed the access road to higher ground. The motel parking lot stood mercifully dry, elevated above the flooding below. Sarah unlocked the office with shaking hands, leaving puddles on the new carpet as she made her way to the back room where she kept emergency supplies. Dry clothes, water, first aid kit. She changed quickly, then tried calling Dr. Phillips again. No signal. The storm had knocked out cell service. Another contraction seized her, more powerful than any before. Sarah leaned against the wall, riding the wave of pain. When it subsided, she checked the landline phone. Dead. Stay calm, she told herself, remembering her birthing classes. First labors typically lasted 12 to 24 hours. Emergency services would surely reach her before delivery became imminent. Through the office window, Sarah watched transformers explode in the distance as power lines succumbed to the storm. The motel's lights flickered, then stabilized, the backup generator kicking in automatically. As another contraction began, Sarah felt a warm trickle down her legs. Her water had broken. No, she whispered. Labor would accelerate now. She needed help. Sarah made her way out of the office and along the covered walkway, checking each renovated room for emergency medical supplies. Finding additional towels, she moved to the next room and froze. A car was parked at the far end of the lot, one that hadn't been there when she arrived. Through the rain-blurred windshield, she could make out a figure watching her. The driver's door opened, and Mayor Hawkins emerged, holding an umbrella against the downpour. "Mrs. Mitchell?" he called, hurrying toward her. "What are you doing here in this storm?" The appointment wasn't until morning. "Labor," Sarah gasped as another contraction began. Early, roads flooded. Hawkins supported her weight as she leaned into the pain. "How far apart?" 6 minutes now, Sarah managed as the contraction eased. "Moving fast. No phone service to call for help." Alarm crossed Hawkins' face. "My satellite phone's in the car. I'll call for emergency." A deafening crack interrupted him as lightning struck the motel's main power pole. Sparks showered down, and the generator sputtered into silence, plunging the property into darkness except for Sarah's flashlight. In the sudden silence that followed, another sound became audible, a distinct humming emanating from room 9. A faint blue glow outlined its door, visible even through the heavy rain. "It's responding to your condition," Hawkins said quietly. "The room knows you're in distress. Why are you here in the middle of the night?" Sarah demanded, suspicion momentarily overriding her pain. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd wait in the parking lot until morning." Hawkins looked embarrassed. "Silly, but I was afraid you might change your mind about helping me." Another contraction hit. 5 minutes now. Sarah clutched Hawkins' arm, her decision crystallizing through the pain. "The room," she gasped. "It's our only option." Hawkins' eyes widened. "You can't give birth in there. It's not designed for that. The energy transfer could—" "It was designed exactly for this," Sarah interrupted, remembering Catherine's story. "My grandmother gave birth there. The room saved her baby. At the cost of her life," Hawkins reminded her. "You know the price for major interventions." Sarah's hand moved protectively over her belly. "I'm not asking it to save either of us. Just to help. To provide what a hospital would. Clean environment, support, safety." The blue glow from room 9 intensified as another contraction began. Sarah felt the baby shift lower, the sensation of descent unmistakable. "We need to hurry," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This baby isn't waiting for the storm to pass." Morning sunlight streamed through the newly installed stained glass window of room 9, casting prismatic patterns across the polished wooden floor. Sarah adjusted the small glass vial hanging from a silver chain around her neck, a token containing a few grains of the room's mineral compound before greeting the elderly woman in the wheelchair. "Mrs. Abernathy, welcome to the Pinewood," Sarah said warmly. "Room 9 is ready for you." 1 year had passed since that stormy night when Sarah had given birth to Lily Catherine Mitchell in the mysterious room that had once saved her own grandmother's child. The events of that night had transformed both Sarah and the room itself in ways no one could have predicted. Mayor Hawkins wheeled Mrs. Abernathy into the room, nodding respectfully to Sarah as he transferred the woman to the specially designed reclining chair that had replaced the original bed. "Remember, 3 sessions of 20 minutes each," Sarah instructed as she adjusted the crystalline fixtures now openly displayed on the ceiling. "The arthritis should show improvement after the second session, but complete the full course for lasting benefits." As Hawkins settled the elderly woman, Sarah stepped into the hallway where Chief Dawson waited with his weekly update. "Still no sign of Harrington," he reported. "Trail went cold in Canada. My guess is he won't risk returning after the arrest warrants for fraud and arson." The investigation following Lily's birth had uncovered Harrington's role in setting the fire that had nearly destroyed the motel, an attempt to collect insurance money after his failed efforts to commercialize Room 9's power. The evidence had been there all along, hidden in Elizabeth's letters and Thomas's journals, waiting for the right people to connect the pieces. "And the resort development?" Sarah asked. "Officially dead," Dawson confirmed. "The town council voted unanimously to designate the quarry and surrounding area as a protected watershed. Your testimony about the mineral property's relationship to the town's water supply was quite convincing," Sarah smiled, remembering the tense council meeting where she'd finally revealed the scientific explanation behind Room 9's healing properties, the unique crystalline minerals that amplified bioelectrical fields, creating enhanced cellular regeneration under specific conditions. What she hadn't publicly shared was how the room had changed during Lily's birth. The intense energy exchange had somehow reconfigured the minerals, transforming Room 9 from an all-or-nothing proposition that demanded life energy as payment to a balanced system that could provide smaller, sustained healing effects without devastating costs. The key difference, as Margaret Blackwood had later explained, was intent. Sarah hadn't asked the room to save them, only to support a natural process. That willing acceptance of nature's course had created a new pattern in the room's energy, one that allowed for healing without sacrifice. Inside her office, Sarah found Elmer playing peekaboo with Lily, who giggled from her playpen. At 13 months, she showed no ill effects from her dramatic birth, only an unusual calm whenever she was near Room 9. "Full booking this weekend," Elmer reported, handing Sarah the reservation list. "Words spreading about our therapeutic mineral spa." The Pinewood now operated openly as a healing center, though with strict limitations. Minor conditions only: arthritis, chronic pain, stress-related ailments. Patients were carefully screened, the treatments regulated and documented. No miracle cures, no terminal cases, no false promises. "And Hawkins?" Elmer asked quietly. "Responding well to the maintenance sessions," Sarah replied. The mayor's heart condition had stabilized, not cured, but managed through a combination of conventional medicine and Room 9's recalibrated energy. "He's become our best advocate." Through the window, Sarah watched as Ruth from the library arrived with another delivery of historical documents, part of their ongoing project to create a complete record of Room 9's legacy. The town that had once mocked Sarah's purchase now took quiet pride in the Pinewood, protective of its special properties, while ensuring they remained accessible to those in need. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Sarah completed her daily ritual, placing Lily in the special carrier on her back before walking the perimeter of the property. They ended, as always, at the small memorial garden where a simple stone marker honored Catherine Mitchell and all those who had given of themselves to preserve Room 9's healing legacy. Your great-grandmother would be proud, Sarah told Lily as the baby reached toward the stone with tiny fingers. She understood that true healing isn't about cheating death or illness, but about finding balance, giving and receiving in proper measure. The evening's first guests were arriving, seeking healing for body and spirit in the special energies of the renovated motel. Sarah greeted them at the door, the small vial of minerals warm against her skin, a reminder of the room's gift and its responsibility. Behind the reception desk hung a framed photograph. Sarah holding newborn Lily in Room 9, exhausted but triumphant, bathed in that distinctive blue light. Beside it, an older image of Catherine holding baby Rebecca in the same room decades earlier. Their stories connected across generations by a mother's love and a room that preserved life through the most powerful energy of all. Willing sacrifice freely given, not taken. Outside, the Pinewood's newly restored neon sign illuminated the twilight. Rest, renewal, healing. Beneath it, a smaller edition in elegant script. Room 9 awaits those who need it most.